Our topic today is medical cannabis and opiates, and we love Dr. Voth's title, Partners in Disaster. While pain management is one of the most common reasons for people reporting using medical marijuana in the United States, there is limited evidence that marijuana works to treat most types of acute or chronic pain. And in tonight's webinar, we're going to hear from Dr. Voth, who will bring awareness to how marijuana has been linked to the progression to opioid and other drug use, and discusses the many misconceptions associated with medical marijuana as a viable alternative to opioids for the treatment of pain. And we will then hear from two very special moms who are here to talk about how they've advocated on this issue, including creating awareness around fentanyl use as well. And again, if you have any questions for Julie or Michelle, we're going to hold everything until the end. So thank you, the three of you, for being here. I just want to give a little overview of you, Dr. Voth, before you start. So for our audience, so Dr. Voth is a pioneer in the appropriate prescribing of controlled medications and is recognized as an international authority on drug use, drug policy related issues, pain management, and appropriate prescribing practices. He also serves as an advisor on alcohol and drug abuse issues to the Kansas State Board of Healing Arts, is a former member of the National Advisory Committee for the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment of the Health and Human Services Department, and is a clinical professor of internal medicine at the University of Kansas School of Medicine. He has advised the Reagan, Clinton, both Bushes, and Obama administrations, and has advised or testified for numerous congressional offices on drug-related issues. And he has appeared on or consulted to numerous other radio media and has been quoted by numerous international print media. So thank you so much, Dr. Voth, for being here on your vacation. We appreciate it so much, and the floor is yours.
Well, I really appreciate being here, and this has gotten to be such a touchy issue that is so poorly understood. I'm really thrilled to get this out. A couple of just overview points. I mean, first of all, got to realize that this whole battle goes back well into the 70s. And in the 80s, there was a big meeting of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws where they said, we intend to use the medicinal applications of marijuana as a way to get the camel's nose under the tent for legalization. And it's been that driver, even though all the rest of this has moved along, that has really covered, clouded, et cetera, what's been going on and pushed this whole issue. A couple of, well, let's see if I can, there we go. I do want to be sure that you understand I'm financially clean on this issue. I don't take funding from anybody. I wish I did in some ways, but not the cannabis industry, certainly not its lobbyists. I form my own opinions about these things. I'm a leader and one of the founders of ISAC, which is the International Academy on the Science and Impact of Cannabis. It was a group of physicians and other scientists that pulled together about 4 years ago that wanted to completely separate from any kind of political organizations or people trying to push our viewpoints one way or the other away from pure science. This is really what we've faced for years now. When I think back to the 80s, I used to put this slide up and people were laughing and chuckling, you know, the free Cheech and Chong with every lava lamp, medical use bongs, a doobie a day keeps the doctor away. And in parts of the country, this is exactly what we face with medical marijuana. And so I keep this on there because it's really something that those of you that stand against medical marijuana can really say, oh yeah, not happening here. Very briefly, I want to talk about the DEA schedules because a lot of people don't really know anything about these, much less why there's a problem. marijuana slash cannabis. I'm old school. I call it pot. I call it marijuana. Cannabis actually was kind of tossed in the mix back in the 80s to soften the public view that marijuana or pot had this negative glare around it, and they started using just cannabis. Okay, so Schedule 1 drugs. There's currently no accepted medical use and a high potential of abuse. That's where marijuana stands today. That's where medical marijuana stands today. Schedule 2 drugs are those things that have very significant psychological or physical dependence considerations. You'll notice things like cocaine, the various opiates, etc. Free drugs is where the drug culture, the marijuana advocates are trying to get marijuana moved into, where it's an actual drug, it's a prescribable drug, but there is still some, if not a lot, of physical and psychological dependence. Consider here Marinol, which is pure THC, is Schedule 3, but it's pure THC with very specific dosing, very specific available preparations, not like street pot, street marijuana, where you get a bag of something that really nobody will tell you, yeah, this is 5% THC, 80% THC, et cetera. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that down the line. So there are fundamental problems with medical cannabis, medical marijuana. First, there are safe and reliable medications on the market for everything they espouse marijuana for. It's nothing great. It's no wonderful surprise or something that pain patients just simply have to have. Remember that cannabis, marijuana, is impure, unreliable, full of contaminants, and has a very high side effect rate. This defense to possession that tries to be sold to the public out there is really used to bypass the FDA controls, and it really jeopardizes consumer protection. The non-FDA cannabis creates a kind of medicine by popular vote, and that's dangerous. We cannot let that degrade our processes for bringing medicines to the public. Just remember that cannabis or pot, marijuana, is a delivery vehicle for Delta-9 THC, but there's a lot of other stuff in it, and that's something that I've been very concerned about. So let's talk about the thing that's happening that's really beginning to get some attention, and actually it's been going on for a long time, and that is the rise in opioid overdose deaths in America, not just dependence, but deaths. There are these kind of waves that have happened since the early 1990s. Really, some of the early problems were more because of prescribing by docs and not really keeping a close eye on things. And then 2010, there were more heroin deaths. And this, of course, when you're talking about those dates, I mean, it's sort of a rise through those time frames. But about 2013, we started seeing a lot of the synthetically produced opiates showing up. And that's where we got into this synthetic fentanyl issue. And if you look at current dates or current data, there's been a 56% increase in just about a year of opiate overdoses from synthetic opiates, particularly fentanyl. A lot of that's coming in from some foreign countries, which has been an additional problem there. And here's the way we're seeing the overdoses break down. Typically, we're seeing the overdoses among drug abusers, people who already have tried heroin, already have tried other street drugs, are getting illegal prescriptions, pill mills are pumping out the drugs, that kind of thing. There are also overdoses with pain patients, and I had a real serious discussion with pain patients about their potential risks of overdose. Take the medicines only as prescribed. It was also interesting how many of those folks admitted that they were smoking marijuana and also admitted well, I kind of just do it to get stoned. Yeah, kind of maybe helps my pain, but tried to use that whole pain consideration as justification for getting a prescription. And then unfortunately, intentional overdoses for suicide go into that mix. And even though this is kind of 1999, 2020 data, uh, the data has been consistent and gone on for the last 4 years about the same way, but the synthetic opioids really have come on strong because of their low cost, their ease of obtaining, and the fact it appears that there are some unscrupulous folks out there looking to poison Americans. The other thing that has been a serious issue with marijuana is its potency over time. That red line is what we've seen only since 1995. I've followed this since 1980, at a time when ditchweed was something that people would use and get a little bit stoned. Typically, the 80s and 1990s, about 2 to 3% THC. And you can see where that concentration of THC has gone through the years. And now, most recent data is that we're seeing about 20% THC in the actual marijuana samples. And we're going to talk about other forms as well, but typically street marijuana. So it's gone a long way in terms of massive increases in concentration of THC. Now, I want to give some new data, and this is fundamental to the whole issue of overdoses, et cetera. Over on the left is more or less what specialists have thought that the kind of potential therapeutic dose might be for THC, less than 10% THC concentrations. And I've seen that data ranging from maybe 2 to 5, 10% even, still having potential side effects. But now what's on the market, what's on the street is much, much stronger leaf marijuana. Consider that a typical joint is about a gram of that substance. 30% THC is on the market, which means that that same joint, weight-wise, now contains around 300 milligrams of THC. Compare this to Marinol. The Marinol tablets are about 5 milligrams, sometimes 10. But the point being there, this is a toxic level. And then one step further, if you're talking about the vapes and the oils, those will typically run 80 to 90% THC. So a gram of the vape liquid will be giving 800 to 900 milligrams of THC. That's frankly toxic. And I've been amazed at how many people I've had to deal with or heard of that had frank psychotic episodes with these. We'll talk more about this as we go along. So we have begun in the medical specialty arena to consider that cannabis and opiates really kind of go hand in hand. There's a lot of similarities there in what part of the brain they hit, how they're processed, et cetera. So the number one risk factor for adolescent opioid misuse is ever using marijuana, lifetime use. And I've got the sources there if you want to refer to those. The predominant predictor of adult opioid misuse is having used marijuana before the age of 18. And then regular cannabis use increases the risk of developing opioid use disorders. I would have to say, and I have not really kept detailed stats on this, but every opiate addict that I've treated admitted that they typically started with marijuana. So caution. So here's some other elements that are sort of medically and scientifically important to be aware of. First of all, both cannabis and opioids work at what are called the presynaptic terminals. So they they work on the brain cells similarly in what's called the GABA neurons. Gamma butyric acid. And the pharmacologic profiles are very similar. Both drugs cause sedation, hypotension, hypothermia, decreased intestinal motility, and drug reward reinforcement, meaning increasing the risk for addiction. It's interesting that naloxone, which will reverse opiates if someone takes too much and quits breathing, has an overdose, can have some similar effects in animal models on humans. So a lot of similarity between cannabis and the opioids. I want to get into the area of medical use now, because this is probably one of the greatest scams that has been perpetrated on our country and actually internationally that I've seen in my professional lifetime. This whole notion that marijuana, cannabis works for medical issues, and B, that people take it and feel oh so much better, and their pain is oh so much relieved. This was an excellent study just recently that went into the motivations of 1,500 folks that used cannabis ostensibly for pain. And they admitted that 61% of those folks exclusively used the marijuana for recreation, not for pain. 38%, almost 39%, believed or perceived that they had some medical benefit, but also then 80.6% of medical users used recreationally also. So the takeaway is this: 61% were exclusively using for recreation, and 80% of the medical users were using it for recreational purposes. So let's get into some of what marijuana does, because I've talked to hundreds, maybe thousands of audiences at this point, and most of the time people are really not aware of some of the serious medical and psychiatric disorders. Now, this was an early study back in 2007, and really important in terms of the net impact of marijuana. First of all, it was found that the lower doses of cannabis, and they were low doses, like 1 to 2 milligrams kind of thing, actually had some antidepressant effect. The serotonin was improved, and those individuals noted some of an antidepressant effect. But yet higher doses then suppressed serotonin and had a depressant effect. Well, look at what we're seeing today, that the slide that I showed you, where perhaps therapeutic doses might be in the 10 milligram range, but people using vapes, et cetera, may be getting 800 to 900 milligrams of THC. Would be no surprise whatsoever to see those individuals depressed, probably even suicidal. Let's talk about bipolar illness now. Back in 2008, and I noticed well before then that some of my psychiatric patients, particularly that had difficulties with bipolar 1 and mania episodes, smoked marijuana, and when they did, had vast worsening, but some of them continued to smoke marijuana because of that high. They felt high, so they misperceived that it was helping them, when in fact it was worsening their bipolar disorder. Persistence of psychosis, again, this is kind of an old study, 2011, but it's fascinating on several grounds. First of all, these individuals had no prior psychotic history, but then when they used marijuana, they had a 1.9 times greater risk of psychotic episodes than non-users. And this is the really scary part. Even after psychotic episodes, the people who had used and continued to use was 30% versus 20% in those who quit using. So 20% of the individuals who had a psychotic episode and quit using had future psychotic episodes out to 8.5 years. It's almost, and probably is, that those nerve cells were triggered and then down the road continued to fire in the wrong direction, so to speak. Suicidal ideation and attempts, this is one area that parents should particularly be worried about. This was a huge study, 281,000 adults, and these are folks 18 to 34 years. Cannabis was clearly associated with suicidal ideation, plan, and suicide attempts. Some of the other psychiatric impacts, we used to think that maybe it caused some depression, maybe it caused an occasional suicide episode, and now it's quite clear that there appears to be an association with depression, and this is what's called unipolar depression, meaning depression, nothing else, not bipolar elements or psychosis, but just plain depression. 1.8 times increase. Psychotic unipolar depression, so depressed, but also psychotic episodes, almost 2 times increased. Non-psychotic unipolar depression, elevated, and then bipolar disorder in men and psychiatric bipolar disorder or psychotic bipolar disorder, which is really scary because those are the ones that tend to get into a chronic phase of psychotic episodes, bipolar swings, etc. And their risk of suicide is staggering. Now, this was recently published in 2023 in New England Journal of Medicine. This was a very thorough, detailed review by a very highly regarded physician who really looked at a lot of the disorders associated with cannabis use. And again, he went through the literature with a fine-tooth comb and determined, again, acute and chronic psychotic disorders, acute anxiety disorders, and acute violent disorders, which I'll talk about in a bit, acute cannabis intoxication, acute cannabis use disorder, which you might as well consider that's addiction. It's been given this kind of watered down name, but it is cannabis addiction, chronic cannabis-induced psychotic episodes, and cannabis-induced delirium. But then again, a lot of the pro-pot folks, a lot of the cannabis industry says, oh, that's not true. Oh my gosh. When in fact, it's all over the medical literature. Here's one of the things that we've fought year after year after year is there a safe amount of marijuana to smoke? And I'd still have to say, absolutely not. I mean, I have seen psychotic disorders with, street pot, with ditch weed. We didn't really know necessarily what the concentrations were, but some of the research has suggested that around a 10% concentration might have the lowest level of psychotic episodes. But beware, you can certainly have psychotic episodes at less than 10%. And if there is repeated use, compulsive use, those risks just go up even further. Cannabis use disorder, and let's just call it what it really is, cannabis addiction. I mean, that's the simple term that we use for many years. And, let's call it what it is. Cannabis addiction has a number of things associated that we see with youth. Self-harm, all-cause mortality, death by unintentional overdose, homicides, and then and these are with individuals that had developed mood disorders. And I would hope, even though there is a very strong cannabis lobby out there, that states that are considering legalizing marijuana should give serious consideration to this. And I would hope that those that have been misguided enough to legalize it or allow it would start rolling that back and trying to put much, much tighter controls on marijuana access. Now, another area that I don't hear discussed near enough, and that is assaults, victimization, and crime. There is clear evidence that marijuana use is associated with violence, et cetera. And I want you to note, some of these are a little bit older studies, but these were at times that the average marijuana concentrations were pretty darn low. That's not just what we're seeing today, where we're seeing, 60, 80, 90% preparations. So general violence prediction, marijuana associated partner violence and aggression, among college students, partner violence, and dating aggression by adolescents. I would say that, if parents are picking up on either male or female showing more aggression or violent episodes, be very, very cautious to look at the possibility of marijuana. This was looking at again, other forms of violent episodes, impulsivity, hostility, and candidly, almost every parent that I've dealt with that wants to talk about a child or a spouse that has marijuana dependence going on, you'll see impulsivity and hostility significantly represented. The story of Chris Kyle is one that has really struck a lot of people. For those of you that don't know his story, he was one of the most highly decorated Navy SEALs. And when he came out of the military, he and another SEAL were trying to help a young fellow that had PTSD. And they thought that taking him out to the shooting range and kind of blowing off steam and, getting back into his, military roles might help him with his PTSD. What they did not know is that this young fellow was a marijuana addict. He smoked marijuana the night before he was going to go out with Chris Kyle, and his wife was quoted as saying that he was absolutely psychotic. He went out to the shooting range with Kyle and this other Navy SEAL, and he killed both of them. And what a terrible thing. I want to go through just a few examples of marijuana-related violence, and I would caution, these are taken out of newspaper articles, current day news. It's very, very hard to get details on some of these folks, but there's enough going on in society where we're seeing these unexplained violence episodes that I think it's time we have got to get an eye on this and get a handle on what may very well be, and I think high likelihood, marijuana-related violence. This was the fellow that drove through the Christmas parade in Wisconsin. He'd had several arrests for marijuana. They said he was clearly psychotic at the time he did that. You'll see further down there that public defender Anna Keys, I think they tried to say he was not in right mind and get him off because of that, when in fact it was clearly, it appears to be, that he was, red-eyed, glassy, smelled of marijuana, and probably had his violence triggered by marijuana. The Lakewood, Colorado shooters are another perfect example. If you recall, he killed several people in a massage parlor. He divulged his planning in books that he had written. He was a longtime marijuana user. He bought a house that a couple had used, and he said he had a large marijuana grow operation in it. And some of the articles have been cited here. Uvalde, Texas, we've heard this thing coming up again. Fantastically horrible mass killing. This individual was a marijuana user, you know, first reported in New York. He took off and then, you know, went down. They reported his marijuana addiction, but then oddly enough, the New York Times took it off their website. So highly suspicious, but not proven. A Highland Park, Illinois situation. Shot and killed 6 people, injured about 20. He was described in social media by a former friend as an isolated stoner who had completely lost touch with reality. And that kind of story I have heard over and over and over again, to the point that I think we absolutely must take a look at these unexplained violence episodes. So my recommendations are a little complex and going to take some advocacy. But first of all, we need to require that the FDA approval process not be changed, not be softened to try to slip marijuana into Schedule 3. There is strong evidence that there has been some pressure from some administration folks to move it to tinker more or less with the criteria so that it can fit into Schedule 3, which would be a horrible mistake. Quote me on that. Next, we need to have much tighter regulatory control over pot shops that exist, quote, legally. I'd love to see those laws rolled back. It is remarkable how easy it is to set up a pot shop in some states, and nobody with any kind of medical or scientific knowledge, you know, really proving what is going out there to young people or older people for that matter. We need to prohibit THC concentrations over 10% and really require some sort of total limit on what goes out. Then I would say steadfastly, we need to either oppose legalization and decriminalization or roll back what's out there, because a lot of these laws, and this is not a very medical comment, but they just suck. They just put this stuff out there for people to damage themselves, for people's kids to damage themselves. And it is absolutely striking when you dig into this, how much an organized marijuana lobby has knowingly pushed these things onto the public. And for that, I will stop screen sharing. Maybe. There we go. And I'm available for questions if that's time-wise possible.
Thank you so much, Dr. Voth. I think we're going to hold the questions until the end. We're monitoring the chat. And, you know, I'd like to go back a little bit to, or maybe you can just summarize again for us before I introduce our parents. Actually, Bronwyn's going to introduce our parents, our parent guests tonight. But if you could just summarize briefly again, because a couple of people signed on late, this link between marijuana and opioid use.
Well, very clearly, there is a link between marijuana and opioid use. It does trigger parts of the brain that are opioid receptors. Some of the brain chemicals that are affected with either marijuana use or opioid use are similar. And I've definitely seen cross addiction where people started with marijuana, ended up on heroin, vice versa. That's tricky too, because that whole culture of drug abuse doesn't have boundaries and et cetera. So, you know, snorting coke, snorting opiates of some kind. Oh, let's crush up a little of this and smoke it. Oh, let's smoke our pot with it. Absolutely a connection now. And I think it really should be kind of an emergency note to parents. Oh, I'm just smoking pot, Dad. Oh, yeah? Well, look at what's going on there, because the very good chance they'll be snorting some sort of opiate preparation. And that's where you get your overdoses and fatalities.
Thank you. And then one other comment that I'd like you to speak of, because I think, again, a lot of people started to sign on while you had started, and I think you hit on this in the beginning. Something I've added into some of my presentations as well is that this idea of marijuana as a pain medication better suited than using an opioid is such a misconception. And, you know, you mentioned Marinol, which again, I've started to mention as well. I actually created a slide talking about the difference and how these are medicine. Medical marijuana is just a ploy. So just for those who joined a little late, if you could touch on that again, how this isn't a solution for pain management.
Well, the evidence in the pain world is that it truly does not work. I mean, if a person is stoned enough, they may perceive their pain as less, but it does not solve the pain problem. And the other piece of that is I've had patients, advocating for pot because, oh, it helps my pain. But when it really comes down to it, same people saying, well, I just kind of like to get stoned. Well, wait a minute, does it or does it not help pain? And the research data is clear. It does not steadily, regularly, reliably help pain.
Thank you. So I think we'll leave it at that. And then as we said, at the end, we will have more time for questions for all three of our presenters. And now I'm going to turn it over to you, Bronwyn, to introduce our moms.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, as many of you know, our format here is we like to have a professional educate us and really let us help us to understand a topic. And then we show you what it looks like in real life. And we're very grateful to have two moms here that have experienced marijuana use to opioid use in real life. With their children. And the first one is Michelle Leopold, and Michelle's from California. And Michelle has always considered herself a mom, and she calls herself a serial volunteer, volunteering from everything from mothers clubs to Cub Scouts, Little League, and the PTA. She always considered her most important role as that of mom to 22-year-old, Michelle Parker, and his older brother Trevor, forever 18, from an accidental overdose on an M30 pill containing fentanyl. Since losing Trevor in 2019, Michelle has turned her grief into activism, speaking in schools, local organizations, and before legislators. Michelle volunteers with many organizations such as Marin Residents for Public Health, A Song for Charlie, and Johnny's Ambassadors. Michelle, thank you for being here. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't have any initials after my name. I am a mom and a business person. And I actually am sort of grateful that I don't have an organization behind me, because that means I get to tell Trevor's story. The whole basis of my activism is sharing Trevor's story and preventing other parents from burying their child. I feel really strongly about telling the truth. And to be honest, Julie and I are fact checkers, and we're often texting each other saying, oh my gosh, did you hear that? That was so wrong. Oh my gosh. So watch out. We definitely believe in telling the truth, and we'll fact check. So the two areas that I was going to talk to today are when I talk about Trevor and our Marin Residents for Public Health Cannabis Policy group. Those are the two areas that I think this overlaps a lot with, and wanted to first share. I do speak, a lot of my speaking engagements are from Song for Charlie, but I am not a paid employee of Song for Charlie. And for that reason, I feel okay talking about Trevor, even though it's not, even though it's not part of their curriculum, if you will. let's see if I can find my, oh, shoot. Trying to share my screen, share, and here it is. Okay, so when I do presentations about Trevor, and I'll tell you because I welcome the opportunity to tell people about my beautiful boy. Trevor was born in 2001. And as you can see by the pictures, he loved nature, loved animals. He was a cheery guy. He was sweet and loving until he started using marijuana. And luckily, he told us, my husband and me, when he did start using. And about 2 weeks later, I realized that what I know about marijuana was not what this marijuana was that he was smoking. There was no kumbaya in his actions. We rapidly had holes in the wall. We rapidly had broken cell phones and computer screens throughout the house. He became violent. Anyway, I learned quickly what today's marijuana was, like we just went through. And I even did a website, a really lame website, but it was what I was learning at the time. It was my kid smokes pot. Now what? And it's still up there if anybody wants to see what I was thinking and doing as my son was going off the rails. He went to a couple of rehabs, but he did okay. And he ended up going to Sonoma State, which is close to our house, but he was having a hard time. And when I talk about the Trevor, I share how he started with marijuana. Eventually, he was experimenting with stronger highs, but he kept on going back to pot. And I feel very strongly in my talks to emphasize it's not just pot. And whenever a parent says that to me, I try and get them to learn more about marijuana. This was a note that Trevor had made with a therapist the week that he died. He was making plans to withdraw from school, talking to the Department of Rehabilitation, talking with a psychiatrist, finding jobs, getting connected with clubs. But that never happened because he took a oxycodone, a blue M30 that he had bought from somebody that he thought was a friend. And he never woke up after taking that one pill. So I feel it's really important to share about fentanyl in the drug supply now, because so many people didn't know, especially when Trevor died in 2019. Stop for a second. There was no knowledge about fentanyl. There weren't news stories on a regular basis about fentanyl. And at the time when Trevor died, it was 1 pill in 4 had a lethal amount of fentanyl to kill someone. Unfortunately, Trevor took that 4th pill, and he and his friends had taken the other 3 the night before, just by coincidence. And so I did decide that fentanyl would be my main message, but I thought it was really important to share that Trevor was addicted to marijuana. And so I do include this message whenever I can. And hopping up to, let's see, hopping up, you can see some of the slides I use about fentanyl, but then I talk about marijuana. And I say, but Trevor loved cannabis. And I feel it's really important to include the facts. And Johnny's Ambassadors is an excellent source of facts. And you could see they're quoted down here. And just like we were learning, regular and occasional cannabis use as a teen is associated with a greater risk of other illicit drug taking in early adulthood. And Trevor was representative of that. And the symptoms of addiction can be ugly. The very, very sad thing that's not scientific that I share anecdotally is unfortunately or fortunately, there's a lot of us in this club that never wanted to join the club that our child died by fentanyl poisoning. And as we talk off the record, I cannot think of one single parent I have met whose child did not start with marijuana. Just saying, not scientific, but that is even 13, 14-year-olds. So in my opinion, there's definitely a connection, but we won't go there. We'll just stick to the facts. But I do talk in my talks about fentanyl, about today's THC, give the comparison between a cannabis plant and a strawberry plant versus a strawberry Pop-Tart or edibles, gummies, etc. I talk about cannabis not being a wellness product and talking about medical marijuana and how they're using big tobacco's playbook, using doctors and dentists to sell their product. It's all the same thing. I talk about how they are borrowing from big tobacco's playbook by manipulating potency, attracting children, and shameless and misleading marketing. And the rapidly emerging evidence that you all probably know, this slide I always say, okay, I have a vocabulary word for all of you. How many of you have heard the word scromiting? And we just talked to Sonoma State incoming students on Monday, and out of a couple hundred people, 2 people raised their hand. And I just shared that's a lot easier to say than cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. And I explain how that just didn't exist before the high potency THC was around. I talk about the New York Times article and the contributing factors to marijuana dependence. So these are the things I talk about when I talk about Trevor's life and death. I feel it's really important because not a lot of people realize how dangerous today's pot is. And it's not just pot. The 3 areas of my talks are just say KNOW, be an educated consumer. I don't want to talk anybody out of it, but know what you're doing if you're going to choose to use drugs or if your friends are. It's not just pot, and 1 pill or 1 line can kill. Now, the other part that my beloved Marin Residents for Public Health Cannabis Policy group does, we meet every week at 11:30 on Tuesdays. We are a grassroots coalition focused on the safety of our youth. We started off by meeting to prevent different cities in Marin County from opening up cannabis dispensaries. Now, if any of you know Marin County very well, it's where they joke about, that's where the hippies went to retire. It is truly ground zero for the summer of love people that were smoking all that pot at the time. So it's really amazing. And I like to pat all of my friends that are on this call on the back for keeping cannabis dispensaries out of Marin County. And it's all focused on youth harms. We have become local experts. We have presented to our police. We've presented to schools locally. We helped our friends in Sausalito vote down a ballot measure that was taking away local control, and they won 74% against the ballot measure, and I'm really proud of us for that. We closed an illegal hemp store recently, and we are currently working on a Marin County model hemp ordinance because California's laws around hemp and the Farm Bill have many loopholes, and we won't even start talking about hemp and Delta 8 here because that's a whole nother lecture. But we realize there's a lot that we can do locally to raise awareness, just like with cannabis. Not a lot of people know that it's not medical, that is harmful, that there are serious side effects happening. So we're raising our voices louder than the industry, maybe, at least here in Marin County. And we also, on our emails now, we do action steps every week, and we include the latest articles that we've learned about cannabis. Last week's action steps, including voting, keeping the smoke-free workplaces, keeping that in California. So that is what we do here in Marin, and what I do in the Bay Area to honor my son. And I also don't get any money for it. I haven't signed anything with anybody. I am me, and I represent Trevor and me. So thank you, and I'll be happy to share my slides with Pan afterwards if anybody wants to use them for their presentations, and here to answer questions later. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and for all you do, taking, what your family went through, what you went through with the loss of your beautiful son, and helping educate us so we understand, so we don't, other families don't have to go through what your family had to go through. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have another mom here. I apologize. I am just trying, there she is. Okay, Julie, Julie, I apologize if I get your
Shamish.
name wrong. Shamish. I want to say Shamash. So
You can say Shamash. It's fine.
okay. Julie Shamish is here with us as well. Julie is a former elementary school teacher who turned into a stay-at-home mom after tragically losing her 19-year-old son, Tyler, from fentanyl poisoning in 2018. She and another grieving mom started Moms Against Drugs, which is a nonprofit to help other grieving parents. Julie is currently focusing on her new nonprofit, the Drug Awareness Foundation, working to promote fentanyl strips and naloxone, working to promote awareness and drug education for grades 7 through 12. And she also works on distributing fentanyl testing strips and naloxone in her community, and is the driving force behind the legislation Tyler's Law, which requires every hospital in California to test for fentanyl whenever they order a standard 5-panel urine drug test. She's now working on trying to get Tyler's Law passed federally. Thank you for being here, Julie.
Thank you for having me. I do not have a slideshow, so you are going to have to all look at me the whole time. I'm going to start with telling you about my son, Tyler, who died when he was 19. He was very creative, very smart. He was a computer hacker. He was self-taught. He could hack anything. He was really inquisitive. And as a little boy, he was always thrill-seeking, which I later found out because he had bad ADHD. I feel like he was missing dopamine. So he was always climbing on the tallest roof, trees, fences, anything he could climb. He would play with fireworks, anything to get the thrill that he was missing. So when he was about 13, he started to smoke marijuana. He told me that it helped him fit in and it would calm his mind. And honestly, I didn't think it was a big deal. I grew up, in the 80s smoking weed. I didn't know the dangers of it. I soon found out though. After a while, he wasn't getting the same high from it. So it led to him doing dabbing, which I couldn't figure out why he was always taking my blow dryer. But he would heat up the marijuana and get the oil out and dab, which is even stronger. And looking back, he started having some paranoia, which I didn't even know that was caused by marijuana. There was one time where he started freaking out saying, is Mason in the backyard? Mason's coming, lock the doors. I'm like, what are you talking about? But now looking back, I was told it's the beginning of psychosis, starts with paranoia. And I definitely believe that it was induced by marijuana. So he started doing the harder and harder drugs, and we had him taken from his bed at 4:30 in the morning to go to a wilderness program. And then he went to a therapeutic boarding school. Now, all this whole time, he kept on telling me, I don't care, Mom, what you do to me. I'm going to smoke weed to the day I die. Like, he loved being high. So he came back from the boarding school, and he was doing well, got a job, until two girls introduced him to smoking heroin. And then it was multiple sober livings, residential treatments, detox, in and out, not getting kicked out for using drugs, but for Asperger's behavior or just not following rules and stuff. But on October 21st, he was found dead in the bathroom of a sober living from smoking fentanyl. So he was not a case of one pill could kill. He had brokered himself to a treatment center, which is a whole other story, and used the money to buy, he wanted to buy heroin, and the girl that had introduced him to heroin convinced him to get fentanyl. So as far as we know, that was the first time he did it. After he died, I formed drug awareness, or actually Moms Against Drugs, with another mom, and we did overdose awareness days events in Los Angeles because no one else was doing anything. This was back in, he died 2018 October, so this was 2019. So we were just trying to spread the word. I mean, in my world, I never knew anyone that overdosed, and I certainly hadn't heard of fentanyl. And then more recently, my family wanted to get involved, so we formed Drug Awareness Foundation. And like Michelle, I speak at schools, parent groups, businesses, anywhere that will have me. I don't charge. I speak with Song for Charlie sometimes too. I'm on a couple, we call them working groups, with the district attorney's office here, one with the UCLA Semel Institute. I just went to Sacramento to talk in front of a panel on what we can do with the fentanyl crisis. And kind of my claim to fame, or the biggest thing I've done, was Tyler's Law. And Tyler's Law says that if you are taken to a hospital and given a standard 5-panel drug test, they need to have a fentanyl test because it is synthetic. The regular opioid test does not test for fentanyl. So the backstory on that is, the night before Tyler died, he was taken to the emergency room with a suspected overdose, but his tox screen came out clean. Well, me, and if any of you have dealt with addicts, you know they don't always tell the truth. So I didn't believe him, went to the hospital. I asked the treating doctor 3 times, did you test him for everything? Did you test him for fentanyl? And because this was 2018, I had just started hearing about it. I really didn't know anything about it. But the doctor assured me, yes, our opioid test would show fentanyl. After Tyler passed away and going through his phone and everything, we found out that he had taken the same drug he took the night before. So indeed, their test did not show fentanyl. So I got that passed in California with, many of you might know her, Dr. Ronit Lev. She's very knowledgeable about marijuana issues. And so we got that passed, and then they did a show on us on Lester Holt's NBC show, and I got parents from all over the country reaching out to me, kind of telling me that something similar happened with their kids. And we realized that we needed to get it passed federally. So it was introduced in the House and Senate in this past December. It's a little bit different, but because the 10th Amendment says that the federal government cannot mandate like certain things for states to do. It has to be up to the state. So what our law, which is called Tyler's Law, also federally says is it's having Health and Human Services do a study. How many hospitals are testing for fentanyl, how much it'll cost, which you already know it's 75 cents a test, and they will make a recommendation. And that will let the hospitals that don't know that they're not testing for fentanyl, it will let them know. So I've been working all summer on that, and I've gotten 45 co-sponsors, which I know more about politics than I've ever wanted to know in my life. It was definitely easier in the state. You send emails out to people, and to the point where they don't answer you, their legislative assistants, to the point where the last one was like, the subject line said 3rd email or 4th email, and a lot of them did answer me back. I think they probably kind of figured, well, this mom isn't going away, we might as well just answer her to appease her. And I have to say, I got my start with doing Sam's Legislation Day on the Hill. And that was my introduction to going to lobby. And so after doing that, I went with another mom and we lobbied for 2 days and met with people in person. So that was a big help. And I learned so much more about marijuana I really didn't know. And that's what makes me so angry, because had I known, I wouldn't have said it was, okay that I never said it was okay he was doing it, but I didn't crack down as hard on him for smoking marijuana as I would have had I known that, it would lead to the issues that it led to for him. And that's what really makes me mad, is that that information is not out there. In my opinion, if for every billboard that they have promoting a dispensary or a marijuana delivery service, they should have to put a billboard out warning parents about the harms of marijuana. And, as far as it not being a gateway drug, I too have never met a parent whose child died from fentanyl poisoning that didn't start with marijuana. So, and when I talk at schools, I have 2 other kids, and they tell me, Mom, as soon as you start talking about marijuana, people are going to ignore you. So I don't talk so much about it. I talk about Tyler's story, fact-based, and I tell them, this is my experience. This is the information. Do with it what you want. And we kind of leave it at that. And I just explain to them what happened. And we also tell them the signs of an opioid overdose. I give out Narcan. We train them in Narcan and give out testing strips. And basically tell them, I can tell you about 100 stories of kids that have died from fentanyl, and some of you aren't going to listen. Some of you aren't going to think it's going to happen to you. So for you, this is how to make it safer. And we tell them, don't use alone because you can't Narcan yourself. Test your drugs and make sure you have Narcan on hand. So that's my life in a nutshell.
Wow, Julie, thank you so much for telling your story. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Dr. Vo.